In this video, we will look at the successor of the ESM-1B model, the ESM-2 models. These models are quite similar in model architecture to what we have discussed for the ESM-1B model in the previous video. This is why we will not cover all the architectural details here, but instead we will mostly focus on the differences compared to the ESM-1B model. First of all, we see that the ESM-2 model is based on the same architecture or the same standard bird-style transformer network encoder architecture as the ESM-1B model. One of the biggest changes is that the ESM-2 models are available in different sizes, ranging from around 8 million parameters to 15 billion parameters, which is multiple times larger than the ESM-1B model. This allows users to choose a model size that fits their available compute resources and their specific prediction tasks. And additionally, the ESM2 models uses a larger training data set, and most importantly, they also use much larger batch sizes, increased by more than 10 times with the same number of update steps, which means that they have effectively much more training. A further difference is that the ESM2 models use Rotary positional embeddings, or ROPE, instead of the standard learned absolute positional embeddings that were used in ESM1B. ROPE encodes relative positional information in a way that helps the model to generalize better to longer sequences. We will have a closer look at ROPE embeddings in a few slides. Additionally, in the previous video, we have seen that the ESM1B did not use any dropout in the attention or feed-forward layers, but only at the token level for masked tokens. The ESM2 models do not use any dropout at all. So, in summary, even though ESM2 keeps most of the core ideas from ESM1B, it introduces several improvements in model and training scaling and positional encoding. On this slide, you see a short overview about the 6 different ESM2 models that were published, ranging from 8 million parameters to 15 billion parameters. For each model, you can find the number of parameters, the number of layers, the hidden dimension, and the number of attention heads in each multi-head attention layer. We're now going to look at how ROPE embeddings work. ROPE stands for Rotary Positional Embeddings, and the broad idea is that instead of using some kind of positional embeddings that we add to the token embeddings, we rotate the token embedding by a certain degree. And how much we rotate the token embeddings depends on the position. For example, the first position would result in only a tiny rotation, whereas a larger position would result in a larger rotation. In this visualization here on the slide, for a dimension of d equals 2, we can see that the rotation amount increases with the position m of the token, allowing the model to capture positional relationships dynamically. Intuitively, this means that the model learns to understand the order of tokens by how much their embeddings have been rotated, instead of relying on added positional information. And tokens that are close to each other in the linear sequence will be rotated by a similar degree, which indicates to the model that these two tokens are close to each other. If the dimension is larger than d equals 2, the rotation is applied to pairs of values instead of the whole embedding vector. So we take pairs of vectors, for example, x1, x2, x3, x4, and so on. The reason why we apply the rotation to pairs of 2 values is because rotating to d pairs is mathematically simple. It preserves the structure of the embeddings, and it avoids the complexity and inefficiency of rotating high-dimensional vectors directly. Each pair is rotated by an angle that depends both on the token's position m and on the specific dimension pair. Lower index pairs or lower index dimensions rotate more slowly, while higher index dimensions rotate more quickly. So for example, we would rotate the pair x1, x2 in our d-dimensional vector not as much as the pair xd minus 1 and xd. And this design has a nice effect. Slow rotations in the lower dimensions help the model to recognize long-range patterns across a sequence, while faster rotations in the higher dimensions help it to focus on more fine-grained local relationships. In practice, ROPE embeddings are applied inside each encoder layer just before the attention is computed. More specifically, they are applied to the query and key vectors, but not to the value vectors. This means the positional information directly affects how tokens attend to each other and how the attention scores are computed, but they don't affect the token representations themselves. This method has been found to improve the model's ability to generalize to longer sequences and to learn positional relationships more flexibly than traditional absolute positional embeddings. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see a summary table of the important behaviors of rope. You can see that rope is not applied directly to the token embeddings, meaning the token representations themselves are not changed. It is also not applied to the value vectors in attention or at the beginning when computing the initial token embeddings. It is only applied to the queries and keys. This rotation happens before every attention dot product in each encoder layer. And importantly, rope encodes relative position information and it affects the attention score computation, not the token or the token embeddings or contents directly. So now that we have seen how rope embeddings work, let's quickly summarize the main advantages and some key details about how they are used. First, one big advantage of rope is that the rotation naturally captures relative positions, meaning it tells the model how far apart two tokens are and not just their absolute locations. Second, rope works well with attention layers because attention is all about comparing tokens to each other. Since rope modifies the queries and keys but not the token embeddings themselves, it fits nicely into the attention calculation without disturbing the token representations directly. Another important advantage is that rope is generalizable. Even though proteins in the ESM-2 model were cropped to 1024 tokens during training, after training the model can still be applied to sequences longer than 1024 tokens without major problems. This is possible because rope encodes relative relationships and not fixed absolute positions, allowing it to extrapolate to longer sequences better than absolute position embeddings would. On the next slide, we will look at some performance comparisons between different protein language models. Before we do this, we will briefly discuss another notable protein language model that is part of this comparison, the protein T5 model. There exist multiple protein T5 models that were presented in the same paper, but I'm going to discuss only the model showing the best performance, which is named protein T5XLU50. The training task of this model is very similar to the training task of the ESM models. 15% of all the amino acids of the input sequences were randomly masked, and the model was trained to predict the type of the masked amino acids. Also, the training data is very similar. PROT-T5 was trained on the UniRef50 dataset, which contains approximately 45 million unique protein sequences. And the biggest difference compared to the ESM models is the model architecture, which is a so-called T5 transformer network. This T5 transformer network is highly similar to the transformer networks that we looked at so far in this lecture, but consisting of an encoder and a decoder. We've seen that for encoding protein amino acid sequences, in principle, we do not need the decoder. However, here a decoder was used nevertheless in order to better solve the masked token prediction task. However, after model training, the authors found that the best protein representations were generated when only using the encoder and omitting the decoder. So the model architecture for generating representations is very similar to the ESM models, but the architecture during training differs. And the PROT-T5XLU50 had a total number of approximately 3 billion learnable parameters, including the encoder and the decoder parameters. And finally, we see here a table comparing the models that we have discussed for different prediction tasks. The perplexity states how well the models perform for the masked language modeling task that is used for model training. The tasks denoted by LR show how well long-range contacts between residues can be inferred from the attention maps. And CASP and Cameo refer to tasks that use the learned representations for protein structure prediction. The CARP model that you see at the bottom of the table is, in contrast to all other models, a model that is based on convolutional neural networks instead of transformer networks. It uses one-hot encoded linear amino acid sequences as the input for one-dimensional convolutional neural networks. And you can see that if you compare this model with transformer networks of comparable number of parameters, CARP performs a little bit worse, but is not too far away from the performance of the transformer-based models. Overall, we see that the bigger models achieve better model performance, but we also see that the difference between the ESM-2 model with 650 million parameters and with 15 billion parameters is actually quite small.